Hi, my name is Sharon Hodis, and I'm here to talk to you about a new book that I have in the planning process called Children of the Galut. This is it's a Jewish fantasy. Growing up, I loved reading fantasy and I loved reading Jewish folklores, but I never really felt like I was represented. There weren't really a lot of Jews in fantasy. Fortunately, that's starting to change. For a long time now, I've been trying to figure out how to tell a Jewish fantasy. There are a lot of obstacles to that, not the least of which is philosophical. In classic fantasy, born out of wonderful writers like Tolkien and Lewis, took a very Christian perspective on good and evil. So evil was an external force to be fought. In Judaism, evil is an internal force. Even manifestations of that force are still an external, are still an internal manifestation of the internal. I'm just doing this by winding it on the fly. I'm not good at broadcasting yet, and I find that I speak most easily if I just let it go. So here goes. So that's one issue. How do you tackle Jewish subjects? What do you throw in? What's the place of magic in a Jewish fantasy? Fortunately, today I was talking to a friend who reminded me that whatever concerns may feel like they should be there, if you just read the text of the Tanakh, don't necessarily mean that magic is that magic is seen in a negative sense in Jewish folklore. Sometimes we use miracles, but some things are just flat magic. So that brings you to the elements of a Jewish fantasy, and I've been struggling for years trying to say, I want this in here and I want that in here, but let's remember what really makes a Jewish story. A Jewish story is there are Jews who are living piously, or for a few other stories, not so piously, but in this case, piously. And there is a threat to the community. It's never just an individual, well, very rarely an individual threat. When a Jew is threatened, all Jews are threatened. And then by some act of bravery and piety, the community is saved, is the essential story of the Jewish condition. And so all of our folklore from which this fantasy can grow from is grown out of that sense of peril, even in peaceful times. It's always there. So I actually found one of my favorite folklores, one of my favorite folktales, was a perfect setup though for this and at its face the Jewish folktale isn't, but what it's becoming can fit that. Before I go into the book as it stands, I'd like to tell you the story that inspired it. This folktale is actually the sequel to the book I'm writing. A good telling of the story can be found in various different books by the eminent Jewish folktale scholar Howard Schwartz, who was really great in that, among other things, beyond the talent of storytelling, is that he provides a historical note in most of his books for each story. So you know when the story was written, or at least the version he's telling, and necessary cultural background, and where the story was written is actually really important, because certain locations will have certain elements that are stronger in Jewish folklore among Ashkenazi than in Sephardi Mitzrayim. Temporal location is also very important. For example, and this will come up a lot, demons. These are not Christian demons. They're nothing alike. Think more of Fae. Are a lot more benign. The earlier the folktale is, the later the story gets, the more they are mixed in with Christian concepts of demons. And that's essential to the story that I'm about to tell you. Demons are other creatures. They are literally the other. They're not necessarily evil, though very often they can be. A Lilith is a wonderful example. very, very dangerous creature, but even in a couple of folktales, is not always the villain. In fact, many of the ones I've read, the villain is human weakness rather than Lilith outright. Another famous demon in Jewish folktale is Ashmodi, which is sometimes translated as Asmodeus into, I don't know, English, Latin. And he is the king of demons. He is famous for his very long cycles of folktales of him and Solomon facing off. And he is a key figure in the story I'm about to tell. I believe Howard Schwartz calls this particular folktale the Demon Princess. I could be wrong. There are a lot of stories of demon princesses. Also keep in mind that in Judaism, very often demons are associated with water. In this case, the ocean. So a long time ago, there was the son of a merchant. And he was a scholar. And he married. He set about his work, and his father passed away. And he decided to go to sea to earn money for his young family. Well, while he's in the ocean, he's sailing along, the ship wrecks. Because what else is a ship going to do? The ship wrecks, and he clings on to boards for dear life, and he goes down. He goes down straight to the bottom of the ocean. But when he reaches the bottom of the ocean, he finds himself on an island. And he goes onto this island, and he sees people walking around, and it's perfectly normal. But the first person who sees him panics and says, "You can't be here. You're human. Humans are not allowed in here." And that's an important thing to note. Humans and demons are really not supposed to be on the same plane. So he's like, if anyone finds out that a human's here, they're going to kill you. So he hides the demon until the other demons find out, and the demons demand he be taken to the Demon King. Now, the young man is brought before the Demon King, and the demon demands to hear his story. And he says, "Oh, well, I'm a Talmud scholar. I'm a Talmud scholar, but I had to go to sea to feed my family." And the Ashmodi is like, "You're a Talmud scholar." Now, this is the thing to keep in mind. Demons may be other, but they're Jewish demons. If you think about it, if you take a cosmology that says that the entire world is under God's domain, and that the mountains, the sheep, the hills, the streams all know this, then surely any other supernatural being must know this as well. So, and he's like, "Well, since you're a Talmud scholar, I'll let you stay in my court. You can teach my children." So he's welcomed as a scholar, and he gains great fame. And he's eventually made one of the king's ministers, and he gets wealth, and he becomes one of the king's most important ministers, until finally he's the most important minister. Now, the king only has one rule. Please stay out of that room. Yeah, I think we all know where this story is going. So he walks into the room, and he hears a voice saying, "You really shouldn't have done that. You just walked into my quarters, and I'm the princess. My father's going to kill you. But I'll tell you what. I'll help you out. When my father finds out you've been here, and he will find out because he has supernatural powers to know what's going on in people's destiny. Tell him that the only reason you came in here was that you're in love with me and you want to marry me." Well, sure enough, the Demon King finds out, and the young man follows her advice, and before long, he's married to the Demon Princess, and he gains even more wealth and favor. Well, eventually, though, he kind of misses his old wife, and he kind of misses his old home, and he says, I'm really homesick, I'm really lonely. And she's like, "Okay, you can go, but you have to promise to come back. Do I have your word on this?" And he gives her her word, and he goes off, and he's brought back to his wife, and they spend a lot of time together, and he hangs out, presumably with his own children, and he decides he doesn't really want to go back. Well, time goes by, and he hasn't returned. So the Demon Princess comes looking for him. I can only imagine how awkward that's going to be when she meets his first wife. That's actually an element of the story I'm writing. Or rather, well, you'll see. But she's like, you need to come back now. And he's like, no. And she's like, I just bore your child. You need to come back, you promised. And he's like, no. And she's like, okay, then give me a divorce. For those of you who are not familiar with divorce in Judaism, though it's seen as a sad event, it is sometimes seen as unavoidable, and it is not an act of shame. But the problem with divorce in Judaism is that both parties must agree to it. And as a result, there is no legal option a rabbinical court has to enforce a divorce if someone doesn't want to give it. There have been many remedies that have been tried. For example, in a lot of communities, you just basically got some young students to kind of, punch him until he said he'd do it. Because you have to understand that not giving a divorce is one of the lowest, low-down, miserable things imaginable you can do to someone. Because, especially for a woman, if they are not, especially because even though most communities now frown on plural marriage, a man historically could remarry. A woman couldn't. She couldn't take a second husband. So a woman who has to go through that is called a chained woman. She can't remarry. She can't move on with her life. And it's just a horrible thing to do with another person. That's really important to know for the story. So he's like, I absolutely flat out refuse. And so she goes to her father, very upset. And her father's like, well, let me think on this. All right, I'm going to give you an army. And I'm going to send you to the Beth Din, to the rabbinical court, where that man lives. If they agree to rule in your favor that he must give you a divorce, and to take whatever action is necessary to force him to give you a divorce, then whatever happens, stand by their ruling. If they do not give you justice, then take that army and annihilate the town. Honestly, for a king who's just had his daughter betrayed, that was probably a measure of reaction. Let's be honest, this is a fairy tale, and kings and fairy tales aren't really known for their calmness and grace under pressure. So she shows up, drags him to the rabbinical court, and the rabbis, all three of them, they sit around and they talk and they're looking this over. Never mind the fact that he probably shouldn't have married a demon. The point is the marriage is valid. So they're like, you need to divorce her. And he's like, I'm not divorcing her. And they're like, you need a divorce or we are going to excommunicate you from the community. You don't hear about that a lot in modern Judaism. But in certain sects, and certainly in previous times, a Jew who did not follow communal rules could be driven out of the community. That's also very important for the book I'm writing. So he's like, I don't care. I'm still not going to divorce her. And she's like, okay, fine, you've given me justice. It's not your fault that he won't agree to it. But I want at least one last kiss. He agrees to give her one last kiss, and she tears him to pieces. Now, some versions of the story, she doesn't tear him to pieces. She just pulls his soul out in the process. Please ignore my sister's dog. It just got back from a walk. So, now, but here's where things start to diverge. What if, in the process of marrying the demon princess, the demon princess told her his name? When you have the name of a thing, in Jewish folktales, as in most fantasy and many cultures around the world, you have control over that thing. So what if rather than being able to control him, he commanded her to leave him alone? Now, in the original story, a slight thing I forgot, is that after he's excommunicated, after he's dead, she holds up the child and says, please raise this boy in Torah. Please raise him to be a good, pious Jew. I can't bear to look at him. There are too many painful reminders of my husband. So what if now this guy manages to get away with it, is thrown out of the community where he's lived all his life? And what if, though, the child was a daughter? What if he only had one other child from his first wife, and she was also a daughter? And what if they were forced to live in the same community together growing up? about the same age. And what if, after being thrown out of the community and losing his position in the king's court and losing his position in the community and shamed and angry, he leads the community in goods to whoever will take them in. Say, the local non-Jewish community. Now, if you're familiar with Jewish folktales, you'll know that relationships between Jews and non-Jews in Jewish folktales are tense. Sometimes things are perfectly fine. Usually, when you see this, there'll be like a nice interaction with their Muslim neighbor, including one I can't remember all of, but I really liked, where the rabbi was studying on Shabbat and his candle keeps blowing out, so he keeps having to go to his Muslim neighbor to see if this candle will see if he'll relight the candle, because he can't do that on Shabbat. And even though the guy's frustrated, he keeps redoing it. And at the end of his adventures, he gets back into town, and his next door neighbor has become like sultan of the entire area. But things are kind of tense. Now, if you look at actual Jewish history, when you look at people historically who converted, Middle Ages, if we're going to go standard fantasy thing, though this story is sort of outside of time and outside of place, that a lot of people who converted didn't convert out of any spiritual reasons, but they converted for personal gain or for safety. So he goes off and he actually learns magic. He was already probably learning it. He probably learned a lot at the demon court, but in my version of the story. But he goes off, he learns magic, and eventually, though, converts to whatever the local community is. And yes, I understand that the use of magic in a Christian society is also an issue, but this is a fantasy book, and that's just the elephant in the room we're going to have to deal with. And he eventually gains power, becomes a minister in the Queen's court, and then still feels angry about having lost his connection, terrified that the demons are going to come back to get him, and may eventually start, out of shame and out of the fact that he probably wasn't as accepted as they said he was, turning against his old community. And then, in this particular instance, he decides that to wean his children away from this community, he's going to take them out of their environment and stick them in his magic school. Now, the magic school isn't evil, but this guy has some issues he has to get over, and that's the basis for the entire series. When next we talk, I will tell you about the particular book I'm writing, which is predicated on the concept of Noahic law, which is God's law for everyone, because God does not demand that non-Jews follow Torah, nor does God expect everyone to become Jewish to be a good person. You know, getting into heaven or God's blessing or whatever is simply a matter of being a good person. So this is a story that basically all the world's law systems are seen as being based on the law of Noah. When people are behaving properly anywhere, that's where it's supposed to be from. So what happens if suddenly every copy and every memory of that law system is forgotten? Really abruptly, with no time to build or change your society. So this is my introduction. I hope I haven't lost you yet. My name is Sharon Hodis. I might go by my Hebrew name Simcha Sarah when I'm publishing this. I don't know. This is still in the planning stages. I am grateful that you watched this, if you're still here, or grateful that you watched what you did. If anyone has any great links for Jewish folktales, feel free to send them to me below. I'm always collecting new ones. Thank you for your time, and shalom.